bullet wasn't meant for her. Nadia Reeves knew that. She had known it the moment she turned and saw the red dot moving across the wall. Not toward her, not toward the man in the expensive suit standing behind her, but toward the small girl in the pink coat who had wandered 3 steps ahead of everyone else, the way 6-year-olds do when no one is paying close enough attention. She didn't think. That was the thing she could never explain properly afterward. Not to the police, not to the doctors, not to the stone-faced man who sat beside her hospital bed without saying a single word for the first 40 minutes. There was no decision. Her body moved before her mind had any say in the matter. She heard the shot, then she heard nothing. 3 weeks before that moment in the lobby of the Ashford Grand Hotel, Nadia had been sitting in a parking lot in Scarborough, eating a gas station sandwich and reading job listings on her phone. The sandwich was turkey and Swiss. The listings were bleak. She was 28 years old, had a hospitality management certificate from George Brown, and owed $11,000 on a line of credit she'd opened to cover her mother's dental surgery the previous spring. Her mother, Gwen, was 61, diabetic, and refused, on principle, to stop eating sugar. Nadia loved her mother the way you love someone who has kept you alive through sheer stubbornness, and who you are now, quietly, keeping alive in return. She had 2 interviews lined up that week. One was for a front desk position at a mid-range hotel near the airport. The other was something she'd found through a staffing agency, vaguely described as private household coordination, which turned out to mean personal assistant to a man named Everett Crane. She hadn't heard of Everett Crane before the interview. She had, by the end of it, learned enough to be mildly terrified. The agency had sent her to an office building on Bay Street that didn't have its name on the directory downstairs. A woman named Ms. Choi, brisk, immaculate, the kind of person who ironed her scarves, had walked her through a form that was essentially a background check, dressed up as an intake questionnaire. Did Nadia have a criminal record? No. Outstanding debts? She hesitated, then wrote the number honestly. Did she have family members who might make her vulnerable to external pressure or coercion? She wrote, "My mother," then crossed it out and wrote no. She got the job anyway. Everett Crane, she learned on her first day, was 41 years old and ran the kind of private investment firm that was never on the news but was somehow involved in everything. He had a daughter named Elspeth, who was 6 and serious-eyed, and had recently decided that she did not like speaking to adults unless they spoke to her first. He had a house in Rosedale that had 7 bedrooms, a staff of 4, and the particular silence of a place where the wrong kind of tension had been living so long it had started to feel like furniture. His wife had died 2 years earlier. A car accident, Ms. Choi had told her, in a tone that suggested Nadia should not ask follow-up questions. Nadia had not asked follow-up questions. Her job, officially, was to manage the household schedule, coordinate with the existing staff, handle correspondence that didn't require Mr. Crane's direct attention, and be present for Elspeth's after-school hours when the regular nanny, a woman named Mrs. Dunbar, who had a bad hip and was phasing into retirement, was unavailable. Unofficially, she was beginning to understand her job was to be reliable in a house where reliability had become a luxury. She met Mr. Crane on her 3rd day. He came through the front door at 7:14 in the evening, already on a phone call, already removing his coat with the particular efficiency of someone who had trained himself to multitask, even the smallest things. He was taller than she'd expected, dark-haired, with the kind of jaw that looked like it had been set at a permanent slight tension. He glanced at her, actually looked at her, which surprised her, because she had grown accustomed to being the kind of employee people looked past, and gave a single nod. Then he walked down the hall and disappeared. Mrs. Dunbar, who had been watching from the kitchen doorway, said, "That's a good sign, dear. He doesn't usually look." Nadia wasn't sure what to make of that. Elspeth was easier to read, in the way that children who are sad are sometimes easier to read than adults who are sad. She came home from school every day and went straight to her room, and if Nadia was quiet about it, if she didn't hover or prompt or cheerfully suggest activities, Elspeth would eventually appear in the kitchen doorway the same way her father had, watching, assessing. The first real conversation they had was about soup. Nadia had been heating up a can of tomato soup for herself after Elspeth's dinner, and Elspeth had come downstairs in her socks and looked at it with open disdain. "That's from a can," she said. "It is," Nadia agreed. "Mrs. Dunbar makes it from scratch. I know. I can't make it from scratch. I'm mediocre at cooking." Elspeth stared at her. "You said mediocre? That's the word. Most grown-ups say they're not the best or still learning. They don't say mediocre. Most grown-ups are lying to make themselves feel better." There was a pause. Then Elspeth sat down at the kitchen island, folded her hands and said, "What else are you mediocre at?" That was how it started. Nadia had been working in the Crane household for 11 days when she first understood that something was wrong. Not wrong in the way households are usually wrong. Not overflowing laundry or passive-aggressive staff conflicts or a child refusing to eat her vegetables. Wrong in the way that made her notice which cars were parked on the street when she walked Elspeth home. Wrong in the way that made her clock the second time in a week that a man in a grey jacket had been standing near the park gates when they left. She mentioned it carefully to Miss Choi. Miss Choi had told her with no change in expression that Mr. Crane's security team was aware and monitoring the situation. The situation. Nadia had nodded and said nothing, and gone home that night to her apartment in the East End and called her mother, and listened to Gwen talk for 40 minutes about the neighbors and a new brand of yogurt she'd discovered, and the plot of a mini-series she was watching. And Nadia had felt, in a way she couldn't explain, immensely grateful for the ordinary drone of it. The next morning she went back. She told herself it was because of the salary, which was real. It was nearly double what the airport hotel had offered. She told herself it was because Mrs. Dunbar was genuinely struggling and someone needed to be there for Elspeth in the afternoons. Both of those things were true. But there was something else she didn't fully say out loud, even to herself. The girl needed somebody to stay. She had put it together by then. The quietness of the house. The way Elspeth spoke to her father, carefully like she was handling something fragile. The way Mr. Crane looked at his daughter sometimes with an expression that was equal parts love and helplessness. The expression of someone who doesn't know how to grieve in front of a child, and so has simply stopped letting the child see him grieve at all. 2 years of that. 2 years of a little girl in a big quiet house, learning to take up less space. Nadia stayed. She met Mr. Crane properly on a Thursday evening, 2 weeks in. He came into the kitchen while she was helping Elspeth with a school project about ecosystems. Elspeth had decided, with great authority, that they needed to represent the boreal forest. And so the kitchen table was currently covered in green construction paper, a bowl of uncooked rice meant to represent snow, and what Elspeth referred to as the moose situation, which was a clay moose that had lost one of its legs and was being repaired with toothpicks. Mr. Crane stopped in the doorway. The moose situation, Nadia explained, without looking up, because she'd learned that he sometimes responded better to being treated as if he'd already been part of the conversation. A pause. Then, is it under control? We're managing, Elspeth said seriously. He sat down. Not at the table at the far end of the island, with his suit jacket still on and a glass of water he'd poured for himself. But he sat down, and Nadia noticed, and she was careful not to make anything of it. He watched them work. After a while he said to Elspeth, "You're using rice for snow. It's the right texture," Elspeth said. A pause. "What's holding the moose leg on? Toothpicks." Nadia's idea. He glanced at her then, actually glanced at her, the second time he'd looked directly at her since she'd started, and she kept her eyes on the moose and said, "Structural integrity. It'll hold for the presentation. And after, she said, is the moose's problem." There was a silence. And then, faintly, barely, Mr. Crane almost smiled. It was the first time Elspeth had looked genuinely delighted since Nadia had arrived. The danger made itself felt on a Tuesday. She found out later, much later, in pieces from Miss Choi and eventually from Mr. Crane himself, that it had to do with a man named Garrett Fenn. Not a name in the file she'd been given. Not someone she was supposed to know about. A former business associate who had, over the past 8 months, made a series of increasingly escalating decisions that had put him in serious conflict with the people Everett Crane did business with, and who had apparently decided that the most efficient way to resolve that conflict was to make a statement. Elspeth was the statement. Nadia didn't know any of this on the morning she took Elspeth to a benefit gala preview at the Ashford Grand Hotel, a cultural event for children of donor families that Mrs. Dunbar had originally been supposed to supervise. She knew the security detail had been increased. She knew there were 2 men she'd been introduced to, Corvin and a younger one everyone called Dutch, who would be with them. She knew that Miss Choi had called that morning to confirm the schedule and had said at the end, "Please stay close to her today," with an emphasis on clothes that Nadia had taken seriously. The hotel was downtown, all marble floors and winter light coming through tall windows, children in their formal clothes running slightly wild among the tasteful decorations. Elspeth had worn a navy dress with white tights and had allowed Nadia to put her hair in a braid, which was a significant concession. She held Nadia's hand going up the steps, which she didn't always do anymore. For 2 hours everything was fine. Elspeth watched a puppet show with the focused attention of a film critic. She ate exactly 3 petit fours and then stopped because she had decided she didn't want to want more than 3. She told Nadia gravely that the floral arrangements were trying too hard. Nadia laughed and caught Corvin's eye across the room, and he gave her the small nod that meant still clear. Then Elspeth spotted a display in the adjoining hallway, something to do with animal habitats, which were currently Elspeth's entire personality, and slipped forward, and the crowd shifted, and for 3 seconds Elspeth was not directly beside her, but 3 steps ahead, and Nadia saw the red dot on the wall before she saw where it was moving. It was moving towards the small girl in the navy dress. Nadia moved. She heard the shot, then she heard nothing. She woke up in the hospital with a ceiling she didn't recognize and a pain in her left shoulder that was the loudest thing she had ever felt in her life. Her mother was beside her, holding her right hand with both of her own, and Gwen's face was doing something it almost never did, which was cry. "Mom," Nadia said. Her voice came out strange. Thin. "Oh, thank God," her mother said, which was funny because Gwen Reeves was one of the least religious people Nadia had ever known. The bullet had gone through the outer edge of her shoulder. Clean, the doctors said, which was the word they used when they meant lucky. She would need surgery to repair a torn muscle. She would have months of physiotherapy. She would most likely have full use of her arm. Elspeth was fine. That was the first thing Nadia asked about once she had enough of her mind back to form the question, and Gwen had said yes, the little girl was fine, and a man had come, twice, to make sure Nadia was being taken care of. What man? Gwen's expression was interesting. Tall man, good coat, very quiet. He sat there for a while. She nodded toward the chair beside the bed, didn't say much, just sat. Nadia closed her eyes. He came back the next afternoon. She was awake this time, propped up on pillows, her left arm immobilized in a sling she already hated. She heard the knock, the particular courtesy of it, a knock that wasn't asking to enter so much as announcing intent. And then Mr. Crane came in. He sat down in the chair without being invited. He was in a suit again, but not the same tension as before. Something had shifted in the set of his shoulders, some load redistributed. He looked, she thought, like a man who had not slept in 2 days and had decided not to let that show. He didn't start with "How are you?" He didn't start with "Thank you." He just looked at her for a moment and then said, "She asked me to give you this." He held out a folded piece of paper, child's drawing on the outside. Nadia took it with her right hand and unfolded it slowly. Inside was a picture of 2 people, one tall, one small, standing in front of something that was either a very elaborate snowflake or Elspeth's representation of the boreal forest from the kitchen table. Underneath, in careful capital letters, "I am glad you stayed." Nadia looked at the drawing for a long time. "She wouldn't go to sleep last night," Mr. Crane said, "until I told her I'd seen you. I said you were going to be all right." A pause. "I needed that to be true." "It is," Nadia said. Her voice was still thin, but steadier now. He nodded. He looked at his hands. "I need you to understand," he said, "that what you did, no one asked you to do that. No one expected it, and I don't intend to." He stopped, started again. "I don't have the right words for it. I've been trying to find them for 2 days. You don't have to find them, I think I do." He looked up. She lost her mother 2 years ago. She has been very careful ever since about who she lets herself rely on. So have I. In different ways. And you came into this house and you fixed a clay moose with toothpicks, and you told her grown-ups were lying when they said things were fine, and she... He paused. "She trusts you. She doesn't trust easily. Neither do I." Nadia was quiet. "Garrett Fenn is in custody," he said. "The people he was working with have been dealt with. It won't happen again. I can say that with certainty. I believe you. The position, if you want it, is still yours. The terms will be different." He paused. "But that's not." He looked at the drawing in her hand. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "All right. Did you stay because of the salary?" She thought about it, properly, the way the question deserved. She thought about the parking lot in Scarborough and the gas station sandwich and the job listing. She thought about Elspeth in her socks saying that's from a can. She thought about a small girl in a big quiet house learning to take up less space. "No," she said. He didn't smile, but something in his face changed, the way ice changes when it's not quite thawing yet but has decided to consider it. "Good," he said. And then, after a pause, "I'd like you to recover fully before coming back. There's no rush. I'll be bored. You can call Elspeth. She has opinions about your recovery plan. She's already written a list." Nadia laughed, a real laugh, which hurt her shoulder and didn't matter at all. "Of course she has." He stood. He put on his coat with the same efficient movement she'd seen that first evening, but slower now, like a man who had somewhere to be but was allowing himself an extra moment. He stopped at the door. "Mrs. Reeves," he said. "Nadia," she corrected. A pause, then, "Nadia." He said it like he was learning the weight of it. "Thank you." He left, and the room, which should have felt emptier, somehow didn't. The weeks that followed were not a fairy tale. She would have been suspicious of them if they had been. Recovery was painful and slow in the way physiotherapy always is, incremental and humbling, a daily reminder that the body heals on its own schedule, regardless of how inconvenient that is. Her mother stayed with her for the first week and cooked enormous, nutritious meals and complained about Nadia's apartment, and was, secretly, exactly what Nadia needed. Elspeth called 3 times in the first week. The calls were not long, but they were purposeful. On the first call, she read Nadia the list of her recommended recovery activities, which included 10 minutes of fresh air daily, even if it's cold, especially if it's cold, and no sad movies, only good movies, I will send, titles. On the second call, she updated Nadia on the status of the Boreal Forest project, which had received a very good grade, and reported that the moose's toothpick leg had held through the entire presentation. On the third call, she didn't have a specific agenda. She just talked, and Nadia listened, and at the end Elspeth said, "Are you really coming back? I'm really coming back." A pause. Promise is a strong word, I know, I promise. Crane called once, on a Wednesday evening, and they spoke for 12 minutes about nothing in particular. The logistics of her recovery, a question she had about her physiotherapy coverage, a brief discussion about the weather in a city where the weather was always available as a neutral subject. He was not a man who was comfortable with easy conversation. She was learning that was not the same thing as being a man who didn't want it. She went back to the house on a Monday, 5 weeks after the shooting, her arm still in a partial sling, her mother having extracted 3 separate promises about not overdoing it. Elspeth was waiting in the front hallway. She had her hands clasped in front of her in the particular way she held herself when she was trying not to show how much she was feeling something. She looked at Nadia for a moment, then she said, "You're thinner. The hospital food was terrible. I know. I told my father to bring you better food. He said he had. He brought very good sandwiches. I know. I chose them." Elspeth lifted her chin slightly, the gesture of a child who is proud but has decided not to be obvious about it. "Mrs. Dunbar is coming back part-time. She said the hip is better, I'm glad. You'll both be here." "Yes." A pause. "That's good," Elspeth said. I think that's good." And then, with the speed and stealth of someone who has decided to do a thing before they can change their mind, she stepped forward and hugged Nadia around the middle, her face pressed against Nadia's good shoulder, her arms careful and fierce at once. Nadia held her back with her right arm. Neither of them said anything. From the top of the stairs, she was aware of Mr. Crane watching. She didn't look up, but she knew he was there the same way you know certain things. Not from evidence, but from the particular quality of the air in a room where someone is paying attention. After a moment, she heard his footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming down. It did not happen quickly or neatly, or in any way that would have made a clean story. That was what Nadia told her mother, months later, when Gwen was trying to make sense of it, because Gwen had a talent for turning things into the kind of story where the arc was visible and the lesson was clear. "Real things don't work that way," Nadia said. "Real things happen sideways." What happened was this. They had dinner together on a Tuesday, the 3 of them, because Elspeth had decided Nadia should eat with them, and Mr. Crane had not disagreed. And then it became 2 Tuesdays, and then 3. And somewhere in there it became Wednesday and Thursday too, and at some point the word dinner stopped being a scheduled event and just became a thing that happened. He wasn't easy. He would be the first to admit it, and sometimes the last to act on it. He was a man who'd spent 2 years building walls around his grief and calling it composure, and composure had served him, and giving it up was not something he did gracefully. There were evenings he was present in body, and somewhere else entirely in his head. And Nadia had learned not to chase him into that place, but to simply still be there when he came back from it. There was one evening in November, the sky the particular dark blue of Toronto at 6 o'clock in November, when he found her in the kitchen after Elspeth had gone to bed, and he just stood there for a moment without saying anything. She was washing a pot. He leaned against the counter. Outside the window, the first snow of the season had started. She would have loved that, he said. She didn't have to ask who. "Tell me something about her," Nadia said. She hadn't planned to say it. She didn't know if it was the right thing. But he turned and looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. Something cracked open and honest, and then he did tell her. Something small. A habit his wife had, a particular way she used to set her coffee cup down. Something so specific it could only have come from actually living alongside someone, from having paid attention. The kind of thing you only know because you stayed. He talked for a long time. Nadia washed the pot, and then the bowls, and then just stood there with the water off listening, and somewhere in there he stopped being a man giving a report and started being a person remembering. "I don't do this," he said at the end. I don't talk about her. I know. I should probably stop. You don't have to." He looked at her. "Why do you do that?" "Do what?" "Say the thing that gives me the option. Most people tell you what they think you should do. You keep giving me the option." She thought about it. "Because you're not a man who responds well to being told what to do." That's not, he paused. That's extremely accurate. The snow was heavier now outside the window. Elspeth would want to check it in the morning, count it, assess it. She had opinions about snow. Nadia, he said. He'd been saying her name differently lately. Still careful, but the carefulness had changed in character. Less learning the weight and more, used to it, comfortable with it, in the way you become comfortable with something you've decided to keep. Yes, I don't. He stopped, tried again. I'm not good at this. At the saying of things. Elspeth gets it from me. The not saying. She's also very good at saying exactly what she means when she decides to. She gets that from her mother. A pause. Something passed across his face, sad and fond at once, the expression of a man learning that love doesn't have to be a wound. I'm working on it. I know you are. He looked at her for a long moment. Outside, the snow came down, quiet and serious, the way the first real snow always is in a city that has been waiting for it. Thank you, he said, for coming back. It was the same thing he'd said in the hospital. But it meant something different now. He meant more than the job. He meant the Tuesday dinners and the kitchen conversations and the moose with the toothpick leg, and all the small specific things that had accumulated into something that neither of them had planned, and both of them had, in their separate ways, been hoping for without knowing how to say so. I told Elspeth I would, Nadia said. I know, but I think you also came back for yourself. She was quiet for a moment. The water was off. The kitchen was warm. Upstairs, Elspeth was asleep in her room in a house that had, over these past months, become lighter. Not loudly, not all at once, but the way rooms get lighter when the windows are finally opened. Yes, she said, I did. He nodded. Then slowly, like a man who has decided to stop being careful about it, he reached out and took her hand. Just that. Just held it. Like a promise that was too important to rush. Outside, the snow kept falling over the city, quiet and steady and clean, covering everything that had been difficult with something that was simply, plainly new.